Over the course of the last couple of months, we've heard many terrible, troubling things. Accordingly, these things have forced the United States and the world as a whole to respond in a variety of ways. Initially we were told the COVID-19 virus, which originated in China, came from the wet markets where various live animals, particularly bats and snakes, were sold as foodstuffs. But 2 weeks ago, China reopened the wet markets, leading us to question the validity of that original report. We were told the virus would kill 2 million Americans if absolutely nothing was done. But of course, doing nothing was never an option. And so to date, 51,445 American deaths have been attributed to COVID-19. That number is slightly more than 2.5% of the original prediction of decimation. Again, we're forced to question the validity of the original prediction, which calls into question all models and projections still being used simply to terrify the public. The goal of our house arrest has been the flattening of the curve, not the elimination of the virus. Such a goal desires nothing more and nothing less than simply ensuring the ability of our medical professionals to meet the critical demands. It makes us question whether that aim is truly worthy of our confinement. But worse yet, with the curve now flattened even in the metro New York area, experts are revising their advice, recommending an additional 2 months of confinement, which almost demands we ask, what will their predictions be come June? Among others, Georgia's Governor Kemp has his own projections and models, which have made it feasible for him to reopen much of Georgia this week. The doomsayers are claiming those models are dangerous and that Georgia will not be safely reopened until June 15th. We have to question which expert models are really correct. We've heard that the coronavirus is 3 times as contagious as the flu, and seemingly in agreement with that, Stanford University released a report stating that the spread of the virus may be 50 to 80 times more widespread than previously thought and reported. But if that's the case, the fatality rate diminishes to almost 0. It makes us question everything we've been told for the last 2 months. And now we're being told, in spite of our lockdown for the last 2 months, and the potential of another 2 months, we will face a second greater outbreak in the fall when the flu season returns. For that will exacerbate a coronavirus epidemic we will not yet have under control. So we might reasonably ask, then just when do we see an end to all of this? Sweden is the largest nation in the world to have not initiated some kind of stay-at-home mandate. The Swedish government and health officials have expressed their belief that the virus is going to spread no matter what you do. So rather than prolong the agony, they have taken the approach to being open for business, anticipating the development of herd immunity. And while they are comparable in size to the state of Michigan, they've reported 1,000 fewer deaths than the state with one of the most severe lockdowns. And again, we find ourselves questioning just who is right. How do we face this disease? What are our alternatives? And what are we supposed to do? We're also almost forced to ask, when does the cure become worse than disease? Now, as we said a couple weeks ago, this is not the forum to discuss the best course of action concerning COVID-19. The complexities of our economic, medical, and educational venues are all too interwoven to make such decisions here. But so far, the experts have truly proffered more questions than answers. And here's something else to think about. Our world faces the equivalent of other pandemics every single day. And some of those pandemics are at least as bad, if not worse, than the one upon which the world is currently focused. Worldwide, nearly 400,000 people died of malaria last year, and nearly 1 million of HIV. But as appalling and heartrending as those numbers may be, neither of those made it into the World Health Organization's list of the top 10 causes for death in the world. The top 10 causes for death, according to the WHO, were as follows. Tuberculosis slew 1.3 million in 2019. Diarrheal diseases took 1,400,000 lives. Road injuries killed another 1.4 million in the last 12 months. 1,600,000 died from the complications of diabetes. Trachea, bronchus, and lung cancers took 1,700,000 lives. Just over 2 million passed due to Alzheimer's and similar dementias. About 3 million died as a result of lower respiratory infections, making it the most deadly of communicable diseases. 3 million more lives were lost to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Nearly 6 million were killed as a result of stroke. And number one on the list, nearly 10 million victims died of heart disease. Unfortunately, the WHO does not include the single leading cause of death in its list of 10, which is the most appalling number of all. 42 million died in 2019 as a result of abortion. You know, we have to ask exactly what our priorities are when an unknown virus almost totally shuts down the world, and yet known disease, known illness, and murder in the womb are allowed to simply rage on. But there's an even sadder reality. All these numbers, even the 42 million, are dwarfed by the biggest infection truly afflicting man. It's an infection that is spread from man to man, from locale to locale, from generation to generation. But it's an affliction rarely discussed and more often dismissed. All men are destined to die because of the infection of sin. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam. Our world is currently concerned with questions about COVID-19, which will in fact threaten a small percentage of the world's population. However, while we have a great many questions about COVID-19, about pandemics, about our own feeble natures, about those viruses and things that come out of nowhere, we are forced to face the greatest question of all. How exactly are we expected to live infected by the most deadly of all? This morning we're going to consider that which is the greatest infection of all. It's the greatest infection because it's an infection which truly afflicts all men. And we're going to ask 4 tough questions in the hope of finding one sure answer. Our first tough question is, who is infected? You know, that's a question we've been trying to get an answer to since the original outbreak of the coronavirus in late 2019. Who has it? If we just knew who to avoid, if we just knew who to quarantine, if we just knew how to get away, we reason that we could remain reasonably safe. But we're told that someone exposed to the coronavirus is most contagious in the first 5 days, with symptoms not showing for the first 2 or 3 days. In other words, there is no way to look at someone and know for sure that they will not infect you. The infection of sin in our lives is every bit as insidious. It may not be apparent in any of those around us, but it's even more deadly because it kills 100% of its victims. In the first 11 verses of John's 8th chapter, we read of the Lord teaching in the temple, and the Gentile court was commonly and frequently used by teachers who would offer their public oratory to those who would come to hear. And at one of those sessions, when the Lord is teaching, John records the scribes and Pharisees brought forth a woman, and she'd been caught in a sinful act. And so they put the question to the Lord. Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say? And they were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. Their question is much like our questioning today. How do we eradicate such an infection from among our members? How do we remain pure? How do we keep clean? How do we keep undefiled? What do we have to do to push the virus somewhere else? What's your best advice? And John goes on to record that the Lord ignored their urgency and stooped down to write in the dust of the court. And there are several important facts which we need to understand. They came to him as a test. If Jesus simply let the woman go, he'd be in contradiction to Mosaic law. His credibility would suffer enormously because the Pharisees could then literally cite chapter and verse which he had ignored. On the other hand, if he was to condemn the woman to death, he would be guilty before Rome. For only the provincial governor had the power to issue a decree of execution. It's a rather ticklish situation, and one that you and I may not find a way to escape. But just as importantly, we need to understand our Lord did not stoop to the ground stalling for time, earnestly racking his brain, hoping that some answer would simply come to him out of the ethereal mist and enlighten him to get him out of this rather touchy situation. This is a situation much like the one John records 2 chapters earlier, right before the feeding of the 5,000. Therefore, Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Jesus knows what he's intending to do. Jesus knows what is coming. Jesus is totally aware of what the future holds. But in chapter 6, he makes Philip focus not just on the needs of the people, but more on to whom he is talking. And here in chapter 8, he focuses the attention of all who are listening on those who have brought the woman. And he focuses the attention of the scribes and the Pharisees on their own hypocrisy. And once they feel the eyes of every witness and the weight of their own consciousness, he stands and says, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." And then he quietly stooped down and went back to his writing in the dust. The difference between the pandemic of sin and our current situation is this. The Lord offers the only answer which all men need. And that's why it's an answer which strikes to the very heart of even the most ardent of accusers. All men are guilty before God. All men are infected with sin. All men know to be true what we have already seen Paul affirm in his letter to the Romans. Death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam. Who's infected? Shockingly, alarmingly, tragically, 100% of the population, every single person you meet tomorrow, the next day, or for the rest of your life, will test positive for having the antibodies of sin in their lives. But sadly, those antibodies, unlike those developed from a virus, will not shield us from another infection. They merely testify to an ongoing infection which is not easily eradicated. The world is desperately trying to curtail the impact of COVID-19. It'd be far better if we were reaching out to curtail the most devastating infection man has ever or will ever know. And so we come to the second question. Who's the real expert? With the conflicting testimony throughout the medical and political arenas, just who are we supposed to believe? On the one hand, we have the World Health Organization, which has already lied to us at least once about the virus originating in the wet markets. Then we have the CDC who is telling us to confine ourselves and wait for it to all just to blow over. But that's not going to happen. Viruses never just blow over. On the other hand, there's Sweden, whose epidemiologists suggest that we get out and about, developing herd immunity. They argue quarantine should be reserved for the aged, the ill, and those in other high-risk categories. And so we ask, to whom do we listen? To whom do we turn? Who can we really believe? In whom can we trust? We'd like to know that there was one right answer. And more than that, we'd like to know that it was universally accepted by all the so-called experts. But that simply is not the case. Yet finding the right voice must be more than randomly picking who to believe. It almost certainly has to be more than merely following along with those who express our thinking. There must be one who is steering us in the right direction. The question is, how do we find him and hold to him? And that's an even bigger question when it comes to man's ultimate infestation. Where do we turn to find the answer to sin? How do we move beyond the hideous nature of that infestation and simply get on with our lives? John's gospel continues with these words, and with our answer. Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. It was absolutely no different in the first century than it is today. There was a myriad of voices all clamoring to offer guidance to health and life. Then as now, most of the world's voices dealt with the necessary change to man himself. He was to be pure. He was to be just. He was to be good. He was to avoid those things that were bad. All he had to do was follow the right set of rules, the right set of guidelines, the proper rituals, and he would make himself clean, pleasing to God, free of the infectious nature of sin. The majority of the doomsayers always contend we can change our situation simply by being different than we are. But Jesus, like Sweden of the 21st century, offers a different advisement. He does not say change who you are. Instead, he says change who you follow, change who you listen to, change the one who comes first in your life. He goes against the majority to offer that singularly unique solution to a very general problem. But in our society, too many times we do like the Pharisees. We look for someone with the right degrees. We seek out a man with the right experience. We give those with a good track record priority. We accept the guidelines of the majority. We want to feel confident in the choice we've made. But confidence doesn't end a pandemic. It's more imperative to find the right solution than to stumble around in the dark, hoping for some kind of answer. But Jesus promises not more questions, but one answer. Jesus promises that a life will stand the scrutiny of light. A life will be flooded with health and well-being. A life that stays with him is a life that's uninfected. But it's also more important to find a man of character than it is to find a man of renown. So the Pharisees said to him, you're testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus answered and said to them, even if I testify about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you don't know where I came from or where I'm going. You know, even the best of experts today have no real knowledge of COVID-19. They're dealing with an unknown. They're dealing with a brand new virus. They're dealing with a new strain, a new mutation, a new concept. And in our infestation of sin, we need an expert who knows what we cannot possibly know. We need an expert who is truly cognizant both of the problem and its solution, not just in our lives, but in the lives of all men, in all times, in all places. man who truly has character and knows what it means to find the character in others. But it's also more essential to find a man with our interest at heart than to find a man who simply mirrors the thoughts of other men. You judge according to the flesh. I'm not judging anyone. But even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for I'm not alone in it. But I am the Father who sent me. Even as your law, even in your law, it has been written that the testimony of two men is true. I am he who testifies about myself, and the Father who sent me testifies about me. We can believe him. We can trust him. Because there is hard evidence, there is hard fact that suggests he is the one to deal with that infestation. And finally, it's imperative that we find a man willing to stake his life on his solution. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. Jesus knew his solution to man's greatest problem would not be well received, but he did not shirk that solution. He was willing to bet the lives of every single man on that solution. And today's experts are not so willing. Their jobs are still secure, their paychecks are still forthcoming, their lives remain intact in spite of the burdens they have thrust upon the common man. Jesus' coming hour was his suffering upon a cross. It was a suffering no other man could have faced, but more importantly, it was a suffering he chose to take upon himself for the welfare of all. Jesus put his money where his mouth was. Or more accurately, Jesus put his body where his mouth was. Jesus was willing to live the life and also to die the death that was needed to clear an infestation. And so we come to the third tough question. What's the cure? Is social distancing enough? Is it simply enough to stay away from people? It really doesn't seem to be. We've all seen outbreaks. We still live under house arrest. We're still living with the threat of how much worse it will be in the fall. Is a vaccine the cure? Well, that's unlikely because a vaccine probably will not be forthcoming. They usually take years to develop. Are closed businesses the cure? Not when such closures merely forced everyone who is out to congregate in the few businesses which remain open. And we might ask the same questions concerning the infectious nature of sin. Can we avoid sin simply by staying away from other sinners? Can we avoid sin if we just stay around good people? Can we avoid sin if we just stay around the holy, the righteous, the pure? It's unlikely. Judas was surrounded by 11 other apostles and in the company of the Lord for 3.5 years. And he sold out for 30 pieces of silver. Well, can we be inoculated so that sin does not enter our lives? Is there some way we can get those antibodies and they will use or act as a shield within our bodies to drive away further sin? That too is unlikely. There are children from Christian homes greatly infected by sin, and there are children from sinful homes who find the cure in their lives. Can we avoid sin by avoiding those places where sinners congregate? Hardly. There are teachers who abuse their pupils. There are policemen who go on the take. There are men of the cloth who go astray. Remember Paul's associate Demas? Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Our cure is rare because it's singular. But even though it's rare, our cure is available because it's all men who might come. And the cure must be taken John 8, verse 28. Jesus therefore said, when you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. And I do nothing on my own initiative, but I speak these things as the Father taught me. The crucifixion of Jesus was the turning point in the epidemic of sin. The whole of Israel was focused on Jerusalem because of the Passover feast. No one who had come to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover, and they estimate it might have been as many as 1.5 million people. Not one could have gone away without knowing what had happened. And even the centurion at the cross recognized the difference between this death and countless others. When the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. Jesus' crucifixion was undoubtedly different than any other the centurion had ever faced before. Normally, men would beg for release. Naturally, men would protest their innocence. Not surprisingly, men might revile their executioners. But not so with Jesus. Jesus went as a lamb to the slaughter. If the way in which the Lord died can argue so loudly to a hardened, calloused, prejudiced Roman centurion, what must it say to those earnestly seeking a cure? The crucifixion was a horrible death. It was the most abominable way man has ever devised to kill his brothers. And yet in it we find a Lord with ultimate mercy, ultimate grace, ultimate compassion. And we find the only cure for the infection, which will indeed slay every one of us. It's a cure beyond anything any epidemiologist might offer the world today. It's a cure for all, once and for all. It is the cure which has ended our search. And so we come to a final tough question. How long must we be confined? You know, originally our confinement was supposed to be for a couple of weeks, and then an additional month was quickly added. Today there are those arguing for another 2 months, and it seems that there's no real end in sight. It seems that we will never be rid of this virus and the devastating impact it has on every other area of our lives. This virus is going to consume everything, from our economic and financial standing, to our education, to our medical position, to even our social media. And some argue that that's as it should be. Some argue that we've been too comfortable for too long. We've taken too much for granted. We've been too spoiled. We've had too much. But again, we have to ask, when does the cure become worse than the disease? Fortunately, our release from the infection of sin is not of that time. When we're freed from the infestation, we're given a clean bill of health, and we're encouraged to live as such. Not only is our health now robust and secure, but our lives can become the same. Verse 31. So Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. You know, the world will always be filled with those things which are deadly. It may be a new virus, a new strain, a new variety, a new variant, a new mutant that we don't know anything about. It may be a previously unknown form of cancer. It may be the poor genes we simply inherited from our ancestors. It may come in the food we eat. It may be in an unexpected accident. It may come through the hostility of another infested, sinful man. It may be found in the filth of this world. It may occur because of economic depression. It may even happen because of a government overthrow. And none of that even mentions the natural catastrophes which can rend our lives: tornadoes, floods, mudslides, hurricanes, forest fires. Jesus is not promising his disciples that they will never face hardship, difficult times, or even the loss of a loved one, or the loss of one's own life. He is simply promising that none of today's experts can promise if we abide with him, the infectious nature of sin will never destroy us. You will know truth. I love the word know. It's that kind of knowledge which comes through perception, whether through the eyes or simply through the mind. Sometimes you get a sense of something and you just know it's true. Some would call it intuition, some would call it lucky guess. But it doesn't have to be a visual necessarily. But there's a certain knowledge because of that perception, the way it locks in to our minds. And so there will be a robustness to our lives which we will be able to perceive and others will be able to observe. And it's that kind of robust life which will move us from the sick bed of sin to the fullness of health in him. Our confinement will be limited only to the sense that we remain apart from the eternal kingdom until God has finished his work with us here. And that's why Paul could write so warmly to the Philippians. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I don't know which to choose. I'm hard-pressed from both directions. Having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that's very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Paul, like our Lord, knew the hardships of his life. He'd been beaten, stoned, shipwrecked, hungry, and in danger. He'd been jailed and flogged, but in spite of all that, he knew what it meant to be freed of the deadly affliction which assails all men. So he's rightfully torn. He wants to live the life of health and a robust nature, but he also wants to see the great physician who made such a life possible. We don't know what the experts are going to say next concerning COVID-19, and this morning it doesn't matter. For we do know what it means to be cleansed of the worst disease even Satan himself can throw at us. We've been cleansed that we might offer that same cleansing to others still infected. And while it's certainly more difficult while we're under house arrest, we must remain conscious of those who are still in need of his healing touch. For we have found the answer to life's greatest questions and life's greatest